It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebest. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurposed alongside Ben Tages. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you're listening to us on the radio. Perhaps you found us online. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, and subscribe. Better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you would just take a quick second and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people can just flip the switch from working a career maybe 30, 40 plus years, focusing on building a retirement nest egg, then shutting it off without taking methodical steps to living what we call a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this podcast, we continue our series on retirement happiness. Society tells us that retirement is the time when we can truly live and be happy. But does retirement make good on that promise? And furthermore, what makes us happy in the first place? Today, we talk about leveraging your past experiences. The very first step in developing your repurpose in retirement is to actually take a look back. In this podcast, Ben talks about two distinctive times for a retiree to reflect on past experiences. And he also poses two questions to ponder as you process the experiences you've had both personally and professionally. Enjoy this episode. Hi, folks. Welcome back. We are continuing our series on retirement happiness, and we're going to start to kind of shift gears just a little bit. We're going to talk more about the repurpose or the talent side of this equation, as we've been talking a little bit, or not at least not a little bit, a lot of bit about the financial side of retirement over the last several shows. So we got a great show for you, and again, this is going to be a huge value add podcast. For those of you who missed our latest seminar, Grand Connections, Creating Deep, Meaningful Connections with Grandchildren, man, you really missed out on a spectacular event. We just had that event last week as of the recording of this podcast. And this is something that was a little bit of a shift for us, definitely something we haven't covered specifically on our platform before. And it just was a fabulous seminar for those of you listening who were part of that. We really hope that was a really valuable time for you and a usage of your time. Ben Tages joins me on the show now. And again, this was something that we really felt like was necessary because it was a heart cry of the people that we work with, our retirees, and more specifically our grandparents. But really, at the end of the day, grandparents, at the heart level, they want to have connection. They want to leave a legacy. They want to impact, but a lot of retirees and grandparents maybe struggle in this department.
Yeah, I think they struggle on that because, they're not using the proper framework many times. I know I've had it. I mean, I'm coaching a bunch of young kids right now, coaching golf, middle school. I don't know why I signed up for that, but I did. And I went real quick into, how do I help them? How do I correct them? How do I, just instead of first building trust, building relationship. And there's so much of that we talked about today that I learned a ton. And I think retirees today, more than anything, want to know that they were significant. They want to later on in their life know that they made a difference, right? And they've been, they've helped their children and grandchildren lead productive, great lives. And so many times, and we heard that today, it's, oh man, I just want to shake them. I just want to, they're doing it wrong. They got to do it different. And you may be right with that. You may be right that many parents today are parenting very different than you did. Many times I would agree that the way that it was probably better. But one of the things that stuck out to me, Jared, is when Jim said, we really got to start with where they're at, right? Come to their level and say, okay, why, how do they view the world? How do they look at things? And I think about that like with my own children right now. We're having this ongoing battle with phones, and what's on their phone, what apps do they get? And what I thought of today is many times I, as a parent, come across and say, it's so hard to be a parent today. Me and my friends, we talk about that. It's like, oh man, being a parent, it's so different, it's so hard. We got technology, and I hear grandparents say the same thing. It's so hard being a grandparent today. Well, I would say it's much harder to be a kid today. And you look at kids today and what that technology can do to them, the information they have on it that is readily available that, little boys like us back then they had to search for. And then you look at girls and what they're seeing on TikTok and
it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Yeah. What is beauty to them? And they're like, it's hard to look and feel good about yourself when you see that constantly. So I think it's hard to be a kid today. Yeah. And if there's something I heard today, it was, don't come at your children like, oh man, this phone is bad, or what you're doing. You have to look first at yourself, right, and say, okay, why am I coming at them this way? How am I feeling? And then also, how are they looking at the situation? Because it's not easy being a kid today.
We connected with an organization called Connected Families. They're based in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. They do really great work helping parents and grandparents nurture their relationship with their kids and their grandkids. We had the co-founder of the organization, Jim Jackson, on the call, as well as a certified parent coach, Deja Young. And we spent a lot of time talking about just that, just really having empathy for your adult children and your grandchildren, and really taking it real slow. Again, where we want to interject and start to correct behavior, they really were emphasizing the long haul of the relationship and really creating an atmosphere where you can really connect deeply, and that's where the impact and legacy come into play.
Yeah, again, I talk about that in our financial businesses. Don't ever confuse legacy and inheritance, right? Legacy is a lasting impact you have on people. Inheritance is the money your kids are going to spend. Right. And everything we talked about was actually legacy today. It was like, what's the lasting impact you could have on your kids? And there are so much retirees today that we need from you. So you may think that you're just radiating some of this information. Right. Some of it you might be, but a lot of it you need to be specific, and you need to share with your children, share with your grandchildren that wisdom. But if you follow the framework we talked about today, they'll be so much more receptive to that. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Again, if you missed out on our latest seminar, Grand Connections, Creating Deep, Meaningful Connections with Grandchildren, you're not out of luck yet. It is on our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search Teachus Financial, I'll also post some links on our Facebook group, Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. So if you missed out, you can check out the video replay. I encourage you to do it. It was just a really great seminar, tons of nuggets and good information in that. So go check that out. All right, let's talk about today's show. Again, we are continuing this series on retirement happiness. We just wrapped up kind of the mini series within the series, Ben, over the last 5 or 6 episodes, where we did talk really about the financial side in a different context when it comes to retirement. And last week we talked about really the truth behind financial stewardship and what that meant. I thought that was a great show, but really it's this idea of time, talent, and treasure. Our process really follows that framework. And we kind of have to start, though, with addressing the treasure piece, but it's not in the context that you would typically think retirement planning information is based.
Yeah, you might think that, you hear that, it's like, oh, they're going to sell an investment product or something. This is all about getting your mindset right. Nothing to do with that. I mean, that's to be had with your individual relationship with your own financial person, your own retirement planner. What we're trying to do is start with your mindset, right? And that is where we think it's more important. And why do we start there? You might think, well, why do you start there? Well, it's because it is so important that we get that part right. You look at how we have been shaped, how the world and our society has pushed us to be discontent, how it's pushed us to look at, things are all about us. It's pushed us into this framework of nothing's enough, right? We always need more. Unless you can kind of flip that around, the stuff that we're going to be talking about the rest of this series won't sink in. Yeah, it just won't.
Yeah, absolutely. If you start getting into the talent piece and the time piece, if our posture isn't correct, if our mindset, our heart isn't right with our relationship with money, it's going to be hard to do that. You're very quick to bring up, the Bible talks about money was like 2,300 plus times. It's not that money is bad. That's not why it's mentioned so much. But I think, again, if our heart is not in the right posture, we will have an impure relationship maybe is the right word for it with money. And that needs to be addressed. In the financial side of our business, we talk about the finances, but we also talk specifically with our clients too about this idea of their relationship with money. And again, that's why we spent so much time with it. And as you just mentioned, if you can alleviate that money disorder, which is, we spent an entire show just talking about that, and that's a new concept to you listening to this right now, go back on iTunes, find that show and listen to it, because everything going forward here over the next several shows, it's going to be a hard mountain to climb if we haven't really identified that. All right, so today we're going to cover the talent portion. Again, time, talent, treasure. We spent the last several episodes talking about treasure. Now we're going to get into the talent side. And again, we're going to spend probably a couple of episodes just talking about this. Ben, let's discuss the old way of doing things, because this is a facet or a vein or a topic in the retirement planning space that just really is not talked about using the old way of doing retirement planning.
Yeah, I think the old way, Jared, might look like the way that I used to do things. I've told a story, and it's in my book, Repurpose, where I walk through how I helped an individual make a decision that it was time for them to retire, right? And kind of forgot some of these other pieces that are so important. And what happened is he retired, 3 years earlier than really he should have. He was kind of coming in, getting ready to think about retirement and start processing. When we gave him the financial report, he said, "Yeah, I can do this now." I said, "Absolutely. And if you can retire, you should," right? And he did. And when he came in, and you have to read the book to get more, but it didn't go so well for him. Now, what I used to say is, don't forget, you got to have purpose, right? And even the book, throw that in kind of on the side. Hey, don't forget, you're going to want to have a hobby or two. Right. You're going to want to make sure you volunteer a little bit at church. You're going to want to, those types of things. I think that's what our industry has been very good at in the past, is we talk about it in jest. Hey, don't forget, it's really about retirement planning is about the financial side, but don't forget, you'll need a little purpose. Mm-hmm. Instead, we should be leading with this super important part of your life is you have to continue with purpose. And I think not having purpose in your life is one of the single biggest problems that retirees face today.
I think it goes back to this idea of the way that society has painted the picture of retirement. And in the defense of many retirement professionals out there, that's, they're leading, and you did the same. You kind of did the same. It was like you're all reading out of the same textbook, which basically America says that the sooner I can retire, the better. The faster I can eliminate work out of my life, the better. The more I don't have to go to a work and be tied to a job, then I can finally truly live. And that's, again, we got to start there with that mind shift, because otherwise everything else won't be so clear.
Yeah, the more you can focus on yourself, right? And that is typically it. Now, and if you're just going to throw in purpose, hey, you need purpose as kind of like part of your plan and not a significant part of it, I think you're going to come up short, and you're going to feel less fulfilled in your retirement.
Absolutely. So we're going to spend today's show just kind of kicking off this idea of the talent side, and really the crux of really what Repurpose is all about. So we're calling this show Leveraging Your Experiences. This is a phenomenal topic. It actually came up in our last seminar. And again, we were speaking a lot to retirees and grandparents. You have a ton of experience. And so, really trying to get to the crux of what your new purpose is going to be in retirement, it's really a look back. So we talk a lot about reflection early on in the conversation. I think that's probably where we should start our conversation today.
Yeah, I think you can look at that on a big scale version and look at it like it's part of your entire retirement. You need to come in and look at reflection at first, not just every day. We're going to talk about that, but I'm talking big picture, serious reflection, almost a Sabbath time. I've had some clients talk about it's their Sabbath of their life, where they say, okay, I've worked really, really hard, and I've had 30, 40 years of a career. It takes more than a weekend to unwind that. Right. It takes more than a weekend or a few weeks to unpack that. You need to spend a significant amount of time. For some people, that's months. For some people, it might be even a year. You need to really spend time reflecting on your life, because one of the things you're going to find out is if you're retiring, and let's say you're 60, you have a ton of life left. Mm-hmm. Okay, reflect on what you've done, and then move into the next great thing. And again, it doesn't mean you're going back to work. Mm-hmm. It doesn't even mean you're getting paid for what you're doing, but it will mean that you will have to use some of your God-given abilities, some of your talents, to make a difference in other people's lives.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what people did as a career, perhaps part of their personality, will dictate how much of this initial phase of reflection that they would need. I can think of many examples of current clients and people that we've helped coach. I would say maybe people that were CEOs, like super driven and really working hard, and they think super long term. Those people, I have noticed, they want 6 to 12 months plus of just a real methodical, intentional, but restful time to reflect. Other people are maybe wired a little bit differently. Talk a little bit about that. Am I off on that?
No, I think you're differentiating people who have typically looked at their work as a job and some that have looked at it more a career. And I got to make sure people don't hear that as one is better than the other.
Right.
People sometimes come to our office and they're like, yeah, it's time for me to retire. Here's what I've done. And I've been a factory worker. I've been, blue collar, and I've worked really hard. I just need more time off. And here's the hobbies I want to do. And here's you may find that person actually retires easier and sometimes better than somebody who's been ultra career focused. Right. Many times they need a shorter amount of time to really process because they have been able to turn it off on the weekends already. Mm-hmm. If you're working a 9-to-5 job and yet you're able to say, when I'm at work, I'm at work. When I'm at home, I'm at home. Mm-hmm. Your transition will look very different from somebody who looks at their work as a career, like I've got this business which I sold, and that business which I grew, and then I changed. I did this, and and I've been going like that my entire career. Mm-hmm. Maybe you've led a nonprofit, and that's been you've had 50 direct reports or 100 or whatever that is. Right. It will look very different for you versus the next person. And I think that's a key thing, is that every person's journey through this will look different. But what's really important is that anybody listening to this is going to say, oh, I need that Sabbath time. God created the world 6 days, right? He rested on the seventh. I think that needs to be how you're looking at this. Whether that day of rest is a month or a year, that depends on your situation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And also, too, as you mentioned, how early your retirement, because I can think of a couple that we work with, and they were retired teachers, but they retired in their late 50s. Well, they know they have a lot of time, but really took, I think, it was probably a year or more before they were ready to jump in. What is the next thing? What's the next phase? Where do we want to live? How are we going to kind of move in there? So I think that is a really important point. You bring in the kind of the initial reflection, the big one at the onset of retirement. Talk about kind of that daily reflection and how that plays into the life of a retiree.
Well, we don't learn anything from experiences unless we reflect on them. So I think as you're going through retirement, to be looking at your day at the end of the day, that's what I like to do, is at the end of the day is I say, okay, what was this day like? What did I do well? What didn't I? And reflect on those experiences. That's how we learn, right? Mm-hmm. You have to reflect on what you've taken in, so that way you learn and do it better the next day.
The next piece of this is really dominating our schedule and our time. We're going to talk more about that, but we believe that there's ebbs and flows to our day, starting the day with gratitude, maybe ending the day with reflection. I should have known the statistic on this, but if you reflect and actually journal and write down your experiences, there's some statistic out there that says you're 60% more apt to make changes or something like that, and I'm butchering the actual numbers. But the point is that you're reflecting, maybe better yet, journaling, and again, reflecting on past experiences. You're extracting the gold out of those experiences, and really that's the point.
Yeah, it is, Jared. Reflection and evaluation transforms our experiences into insight and wisdom. That's what it is. We don't need a statistic to tell us that. We can see it in our own lives. The things that you've reflected and evaluated, that's actually changed those experiences into true wisdom. So that's what we're after here, both in your current day, but also big picture when you're moving into retirement, that you look at that period of rest and reflection.
So let's talk a little bit more tactical. What does it look like? Or maybe what are some questions that retirees or people nearing retirement should be starting to kind of think and just kind of process?
Well, I always like to ask the question to new retirees or pre-retirees is, what was your best day at work? Tell me a little bit more about that. And that's where the conversation starts. Because again, there's certain things within your day that you love to do. So if we can start there and say, okay, what was the best things of your day? We're going to make sure we engineer that into your days going forward, right? Because not every part of your work was bad. Most people that are retiring, when they talk about retirement, they actually in that conversation say, you know what, I'm really going to miss? I'm going to miss this. I'm going to miss that. So what was your best day at work, and what are you thinking you might miss from your current job is a great place to start.
I want to put you on the spot here, but what are some answers that you've heard that probably, and I'm sure it probably varies from person to person, career to career, but if you were to ask that question, what would be some varying answers that you've gotten over the years?
Yeah, I think one of my favorites was I had a relatively young leader that was moving out of their position and into retirement say something like, I'm going to miss making a difference in my people's lives. I'm going to miss seeing the aha moment of a life being changed because of something I said months or weeks or even years earlier, right? And I had to correct this guy. I said, well, don't forget, you're not done leading, right? You're moving on from this, but someday, all of the things that made you like leading will come back in your life. You're not, just because you're retiring, done with leading. God's not done with your story. There's likely different ways that you're going to use those same talents down the road.
Now, well, that brings up two things. First of all, retirement doesn't have to be the end of that, like you just mentioned. And I think a lot of people view it as kind of the end and it's time for me to move on. It doesn't have to be. It can be, but it certainly doesn't have to be. And number two, I think it's a great question because those are like little nuggets. They're little clues into somebody's story and how God has molded and shaped them to get to this point, and then kind of send them into the next season. So again, I just, as you're talking about that, like my favorite day at work or my favorite experience or something that stuck out was me leading this person. Well, right away, like then you must be leading in some capacity, continue to do that, but also to kind of the flip side of that. What maybe, again, I'm putting you on the spot. What would be something that people really said, this was really something I did not enjoy about my work?
Yeah, a similar situation where I had an executive of a group that was walking out of that role, and he mentioned to me, he says, I really didn't like people responsibility that I had. It was like he was tired of leading in that way. He literally wanted to be done with like the constant, like, in business, one of the greatest things we have are the people that work with us, but also some of the biggest challenges. So he wanted to walk away from that. And actually he was part of a large construction business. He said, I just want to get back in the construction equipment.
Swinging hammers.
He wanted to get back into driving the truck and doing and now actually loving his work, loving what he's doing because he's able to, get back to why he originally got into that business was creating, right? So there actually was a big part of creativity that he had missed during his working years, and kind of through this reflection process found out I am a very creative person, and I've missed that as I've gotten kind of drug into the weeds of the business. And I think he did a great job leading, but now is loving his work, and I don't think he gets paid any less. He's actually loving that side of the business.
Yeah, and again, the answers that you get from these questions are just phenomenal clues going forward. We're kind of talking about reflecting on work. Reflecting on life is another major piece to this puzzle, right?
Yeah, so look at your best volunteer opportunities. Sometimes the best retirees are the ones that are walking away from their day job because all of their volunteer experiences are getting in the way. I love that. Many times it happens where I love this particular group of people. From me that I have a heart for people in Haiti because I've traveled there a lot. Maybe it's a people group. Maybe it's a part of your community. There's a certain nonprofit you've been part of. Again, I don't hear like the answer is just volunteer. The answer is looking at deep within yourself and reflecting on what's important to you. Who's important to you?
Talk about your experiences a little bit, because lots of times when we think about experiences, we're thinking just positive ones, but really there's the flip side of that too, and those are clues as well and just as important.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we're reflecting, and you've heard us say, what was your favorite day at work more, and what was the best part of work? You have to look at the negative side too. I believe that God teaches us more through the hard times than the easy ones. In my own personal life, Jared, I've had that. I think the closest time I've ever been walking with the Lord was when my young daughter, who's now 17 and looking at colleges, it's been great. But when she was a baby, she had 5 surgeries before she was age 6. And one of the hardest things I ever do was take my newborn, and my wife and I sat in a room. We met the doctors, and at some point I had to take my 4-week-old baby and hand it over to a surgeon who was going to then walk out of the room with our baby and undergo a surgery. And the next weeks and months that came from that, we learned so much about each other, my wife and I, and how we had to rely on God through that process. Sometimes, Jared, it takes us on our knees to really learn more about ourselves. And sometimes God is going to reveal more of what He can do in your life through taking you through a really painful experience.
Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Retire Repurpose. For more information, visit our website, retirerepurposed.com. I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.